Okay, so real quick, we're going to get right into we have an incredible show for you where when I was reading something directly from the SSA OIG website the other day, which was essentially Social Security Disability Insurance Fraud Conspiracy in Puerto Rico, which was one of the areas that caused quite a bit of ruffling of feathers when it comes to developing more of the program for the CDI unit investigators to follow the disabled around, figure out if they're disabled. Well, I got a call, and the call was from a gentleman who is a major facilitator for setting up, organizing, and continuing the CDI units. We're going to actually go ahead, not waste any time, and we're going to go ahead and call him right now. Here we go to talk to him essentially about what he was part of, how it worked, and what I got wrong the other night when reading that SSA document. Here we go. We're going to go ahead and put it on speakerphone real quick, and let's get the phone over here so that we can go ahead and talk to him live about what he created back in the day.
Hello.
Howdy, good sir. Attorney Walter Hnot. We are live on YouTube. We have everybody ready to roll, and we're really excited. Would you be so kind as to tell me what position did you hold back in the day with the SSA? You know, who you are, and how are you related to the origin story of the CDI unit program?
Okay. Let me say I retired from Social Security in 2007. I have no connection with them whatsoever these days. I am not in any way an official spokesman for Social Security. Okay?
Excellent.
Okay. So what were your questions for? Say that again.
So the big one is when I was reading the document, I went into lots of little things here and there, but you were there, 1995, the CDI unit program. Who were you to the SSA back then, and what happened? What was the origin story?
Well, as you can imagine, SSA has a lot of people. When I was working at the headquarters, there were 12,000 people at the headquarters building alone. Anyway, my official position was as a program analyst, and there were lots of program analysts that did various and sundry things, various parts of the program. And what my specific unit involved was we dealt with the DDSs, the State Disability Determination Services offices. And I think every state has one, at least one. So we did program management, and if they raised questions about things about DDSs, and other people in my branch did budgeting for the DDSs and all kinds of things like that. But it was mainly DDSs. The reason I got involved was my branch chief was involved with, Social Security was talking about some way of encrypting the Social Security numbers. And we couldn't figure out any way to do it, so we ended up not doing it. But we were concerned with security on Social Security numbers. And so when this CDI, when the state of California told us that they had a anti-fraud unit, we were interested because we were sort of interested in fraud. And as I told you before, that must have been when we first found out about it. It was probably 93, maybe 94, but I think 93 would make more sense. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we decided to go out and see what they're doing, since that was involving the DDS in California. And the Deputy Inspector General found out about this, and he asked if we could go on, he could come with us on this trip that we were going to go out there and see what they were doing. And he was very impressed.
Sure.
So he suggested to us that maybe OIG and Social Security can set up something similar to what the California DDS was doing. And so we spent probably, a year or so trying to figure out whether that was a good idea or not, how we would set it up, who would be involved, the whole, start from scratch sort of issue. And our main concern at this time, the investigations would be strictly involving fraud on the disability insurance program. And so then it became, okay, so how much would it cost to set up one of these units versus how much money do we think we could save by recouping disability payments that were paid incorrectly basically for fraud, but could be other reasons. And so we crunched a bunch of numbers and said, yeah, it probably would work. So then we formed up a more comprehensive plan for what to do and how many people would be involved and how would we work it and things like that. And we finally sent a decision memo to the commissioner. I don't remember who was commissioner then. Doesn't matter. And the commissioner has to approve all these new programs and things that you're going to try. So he said, yes, this sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. And I'm sure that the inspector general talked to him about it too. So that was probably in '94. And so we started organizing units, 5 units to start with, in '95, and started operations. And the original plan was that these units would just investigate disability insurance fraud. Oh, pardon me. But after a while, I mentioned this to you before, when we were selling the project, we would go out to sometimes the regional offices, sometimes the state DDSs to recruit people, to recruit the DDSs if they wanted to do it. And we would explain to them, well, it could be some of your people and an inspector general, special agent would be in charge, and we were going to hire or contract with local, state, preferably state law enforcement to actually, if we had to arrest people and stuff, they could do that. Of course, the IG people could do it too, but we felt having somebody with local knowledge would be a better choice. So we crunched a bunch of numbers and said, yeah, it looks like if this works, we can save more money than it costs to run these operations. And the commissioner said, okay, go for it. And so we identified 5 units or 5 places where we would have a unit. And then the expectation was that if it proved to be successful, we would expand like 3 units every year, which we did. There are 40-some units now, but obviously we didn't do 3 every year for 1995. It would be a lot more units.
Sure.
So that's basically how it got started.
So let me ask you this, because the government is always a little bit worried about budgets, and when it comes to starting something like this, I mean, you need buildings, you need telephones, computers, investigators. Like, what was their how did they afford it? How did they what were they worried about it? How did that come down?
Was who worried about it?
Oh, the SSA, Commissioner Chater. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Well, we did a budget analysis of what we expected it would cost, and it was roughly around $250,000 a year.
Wow.
Probably a little more in the opening year because you'd have to buy equipment and things like that, and things that I had never thought of. But the OIG guy, the Inspector General guy, said, well, we're getting locations. We're going to have some place where we can have gun safes and some access to jails if we actually arrested people.
Yeah.
And, all kinds of security stuff that I would have never thought about. But all those costs added in, particularly in the first year when we started a new unit. And then, just as something of an aside, after a few years that this operation had been in place, the local law enforcement and the inspector general's office said, we could really use some surveillance vans.
Yeah.
So they could go out and take pictures and all that kind of stuff. And I had no idea. But turned out a surveillance van back then cost $100,000.
Wow.
So we had to, okay, we're not going to put one in every unit, but
Right.
They hired a lot. Maybe they've got more now, but I don't know. Anyway, but that sort of cost, we tried to anticipate every kind of cost that we'd have.
Yeah.
And it apparently was pretty accurate that most of the units were pretty much the same. And of course, if you're talking about a unit in New York City or one in Los Angeles, obviously the rental and the office space and all that kind of stuff is going to be more than if you had a unit in, Oakland, California.
Yeah.
And otherwise, once it's spotted, when we had one, and ultimately there's an office in what's the capital of Arkansas? Little Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Little Rock, which the cost of living was a lot lower, so we anticipated lower costs for that. But overall, it worked out to be about $250,000 per unit.
In the beginning, were they like super successful and then it kind of like rolled off a little, or was it like a slow rolling start in the beginning and then they kind of like, grappled their way up the mountain to be more successful, more efficient?
Well, I never thought about that. Since the number of people that were involved in a unit stayed pretty steady, so certainly the first year or two, they got to be, know more about who the people were and where things were and things like that. But I don't know that it actually was a big jump in the savings at any particular time. Of course, the more units we had, there was more savings, but the savings were offset by the cost. So
Sure.
Overall, I don't know whether there was a big jump at any point.
I would imagine they were like, pretty worried about, how much money are they going to actually recover back. And I know that in the very beginning, they were covering most of, if not all of their costs. How did they react when they realized that there was enough fraud to literally pay for entire CDI units, like divisions of investigators in different states? Like, how did they react to the success of that?
Well, and again, as I said, I haven't been involved with CDI for years, so I don't know what might have happened after I
Sure.
went on to some other project. But as far as I know, the staffing stayed pretty much the same for every unit.
Wow.
And that would be the inspector general's special agent who would be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
There would be two people from the state DDS who would be appointed by the DDS manager.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, we started allowing a couple of people from Social Security, either from the regional office or from a local claims office. And there would be two state or local, preferably state, law enforcement officers who we contracted to have.
Sure.
But as far as I know, that's pretty much all it ever was. Now, like I said, they changed over the years.
So what years were you with the development? Because, to my understanding, like you were working on reports that were then getting signed off by the manager and then going to the, deputy inspector general. So, I mean, like, you were in a very crucial position with this. Can you walk me through what years did you serve in the capacity of working on the continuation of the CDI, program?
Well, I know that it officially started in '95, and the original thoughts when we went out to California to see what their unit looked like and how it worked and why they thought of it and stuff like that. That's what I said. That might have been '93, possibly '94, but I think '93 was more likely.
Okay.
But my technical title never changed. I was a program analyst.
Yeah, yeah.
I was never officially the project manager, even though I was the project manager.
Yeah, yeah. So what did that involve? Like, how many years did you do the project manager? Like, were you writing up reports about cost, or were you the one that was like buying computers? Like, how did that work?
Um, well, I basically did all the budget processes. Although I got what's the word I'm looking for? Input from other people in other parts of the office. But as I said, my office specifically was in what was called the Office of Disability. And that was a broad bunch of people that were involved with the disability program, and who was involved and how much it was going to cost and
Sure.
where do we put people and all that organization. But that was already in place when I was there, and I was there doing that long before '95. So there was no immediate transition. But like I say, when we started it up in '95, we'd been having a lot of meetings and discussions with the regional offices and various DDS sources and all kinds of people that were considering what we're doing and weighing in on it.
Now, I guess like in the beginning, I would imagine, because most of the local law enforcement that were hired were specific to that state.
Yeah.
Was there any like bleed over where you were getting arrests in states without CDI units, or were pretty much all the arrests happening for people that were in the state where you have the CDI unit?
Well, mostly it was in state.
Mm.
And I say that because most of the information that we got that indicated some sort of fraud was coming from the state DDS.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it got to be broader than that over time, but originally it was, from the DDSs. Sometimes from a local Social Security office,
Right.
but mostly from the DDSs, because that was who we were trying to help the most. And they, we created a form for reporting, and they would send that to us, and we would give it, and probably they were sending copies to the Inspector General's office at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But that most of the beginning, it was strictly concerned with the Social Security, and SSI disability programs. Now, I think I mentioned to you when I talked to you earlier, when we started thinking about this, we realized that, if we're going out and doing these investigations, that might link up to doctor fraud that they were filling out false disability reports and things like that. And it also might affect, what's the word I want? God, I'm getting so bad. State unemployment offices,
Sure.
state workers' compensation offices, and there were probably a lot of other not so big a deal. And a lot of the states had their own disability programs for their employees.
Right.
So that could be an issue too. And OIG probably would have some numbers on how many of these cases came from where, but we were basically focused on disability. But like I say, it probably lapsed over into a lot of other areas of potential fraud.
Now, I have a question about the politicians, because, when I read the historical documents, usually they make it sound like the politicians, magically thought this up, created it, implemented it, did all this stuff. And I've become very wary of historical documents, even produced by the SSA or OIG, because they don't always give the true nature of historically what happened. So was the CDI unit program politician based, where they were doing all these big, House meetings and Senate meetings and saying, yes, we need to go this direction? Or was it more of a situation where inside the SSA, they were saying, hey, you know what? This is something we might want to look at. This is something we might want to improve and build ourselves.
Well, depending on how you're referring to a politician,
Sure.
I don't know that there were any politicians involved with this. The highest level of people that we dealt with was the Inspector General
Yeah.
and the Commissioner of Social Security.
Yeah.
Well, I never heard about any congressmen or local politicians talking about it.
And that's the amazing thing for me, because the way it's sold with some of this documentation now is, basically, and I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in recent news stories too, but the politicians are, rah 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 about this or that. Obviously Trump with Doge, and this is the fraud we've discovered. Right, and his main thing is like, hey, look at all the stuff we found. And I was doing videos being like, hey, wait a minute, they've been doing this a long time. you know, they've been doing the same thing for a while now. But I guess,
Yeah.
my big thing here is, and the YouTubers that follow me, they get an opportunity to learn from you, like the person who wrote the reports, to get signed off by the manager to go ahead and effectuate, that quarter, that year's allowances to do this stuff. So I guess my big question to you is, in those 90s and then early 2000s, that kind of area, how did the program change internally? Like, how did you see it shifting?
Well, in that sort of short time frame, it didn't change much. The only thing we sort of added on was this annual meeting that I just told you about before.
Sure.
But that was had nothing to do with law enforcement. It was just a get together for the people that were on the project.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't do any actual work while we were there. Well, I shouldn't say that.
Sure.
We didn't do any fraud investigations at these annual meetings. It was all just discussion and get to know each other and things like that. But that was the only big change. Now, again, I haven't been there for a long time, so the project may be way different than what I'm talking about.
So with these meetings, did these meetings start as an annual thing? Did they end at some point? Like, how did the SSA do these meetings? Because, when you start a program, it takes all kinds of people to make the ball round and make it perfectly fit into the circle hole and work as a company.
Yeah.
Like, how did they work?
Well, it wasn't the first couple of years. I'm trying to think. It was like the second or third year that we had in business. And the Inspector General guy that I work with, and he'd talked to the Inspector General, he said, we didn't allow the agency to do these sort of annual meetings just to meet and greet and exchange notes and things like that. So we did, and we did the first one in Annapolis because that was convenient for us in Baltimore.
Yeah.
But then we started moving them from place to place, and we tried to, move them from region to region so that nobody felt left out after a while.
Yeah.
But like I say, from what I see, they probably don't do that anymore because we got 46 units or whatever the number is. That gets to be pretty expensive if you got to put all those people up in hotels and travel and all that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me that they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for most of the people I talk to that are in the SSA nowadays, everything is heavy through a teleconference system where, the video will pop up, or they'll give them a call, and they'll have a bunch of people in a, like a Zoom kind of like feature where they're seeing them all present. And it's tough to do something like that, because when you have people go to a particular area to specifically do a function, their whole brain is on what's that function. But when you just do like middle of the day meeting on teleconference, the other side of the coin is, probably a lot of the programs are set up based upon the original work you did. to kind of figure out what works and what didn't work. But let me ask you
Yeah.
this. Did anything
Okay.
not work that you thought would actually work?
Hmm. Well, in the time that I was there, I don't remember we had made any big changes.
Sure, sure.
So I guess my answer is no. I can't think of anything that was an overall systems change. But to respond to your question, we didn't get. Well, I should go back even further. My first job there was to review work from the district offices about retirement chunk claims.
Sure.
And it was just, crunching a bunch of numbers to see if they got all the numbers right and how old these people were and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And we did that by hand. We were
Wow.
really impressed when we actually got pocket calculators.
Wow.
And then we didn't get computers until 84. And even then, they were just basically word processing systems.
Wow.
It wasn't too far after that we got actual computers. But even then, while I was there, I never went to a teleconference or anything like that.
Sure. Wow.
We wanted to have meetings. We'd open an office in the headquarters and say, okay, we're having a meeting here. Come on over at this time.
Yeah.
We would take notes and, reports and things like that. But teleconferences, nothing I ever saw.
Yeah. So when you were doing these setups, certain states were chosen to kind of begin the process. Why were those states chosen? And how did they kind of pick the states to put the CDI units, like the origin, the early ones? How did they pick which states were going to get them first?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know if there was an official answer. We picked certain places which we thought would be, big multiple, not multiple. What's the word I want? Big, population centers.
Okay.
Cities like New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's why one of the reasons I said, how did they get Oakland,
California.
into that mix?
Yeah.
But apparently California wanted it, so they did it. And then I think I mentioned to you that the Los Angeles office was turned into a CDI unit after a while.
Wow.
So that got mixed up. But and we tried to. Well, obviously we were looking for where there'd be a lot of people that might be causing fraud. So
Sure.
at first, we didn't have any units in Montana or Wyoming or any place like that.
Mhm.
But we have offices all through Florida and Texas, and the big population centers, and they just we added on 3 every year.
Yeah.
Where they have some of them. One an office in Tampa, an office in Baton Rouge, some of the other ones. Well, we had Los Angeles. We added that one in.
Sure. Yeah. Biggie.
California probably has 3 or 4 offices now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there was no, we didn't have a specific plan. We would just go out and, we would go out and if we had targets that we thought, would work, we'd go out and talk to the DDS manager or supervisor, whoever, director. And if they were interested, then okay, then, we'll go further with this and see if we can get approval for this and how much it would going to cost. And,
Right.
and we could request local law enforcement to be there and all that kind of thing. But it was pretty, I wouldn't want to say random, but there was no specific aim for any particular city. It was just where they seemed to be, it would be most useful to have them in, like I say, big metropolitan areas.
So in the beginning, did they restrict the officers in any way, or were they able to kind of act like regular police officers, sheriffs, in their natural capacity? Because it's a little bit different than what they would do as like a normal job. There's more of an investigative aspect to it. So like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
they definitely did that, and mostly, like I said at one time, that we needed them if we had to make an arrest in some state. Necessarily, the inspector general might not be able to do that, but a state policeman could do that.
right.
But they did investigations. We recruited police that had some investigative experience.
Mhm.
Mostly, they were detectives, not patrolmen.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, we did that.
Were there any cases that were memorable? Because I would assume through the grapevine you would kind of hear about interesting stuff. Were there any cases that caught you off guard, or maybe taught the staff that were building these CDI units, how to make it more efficient or better going forward?
Hmm. Well, let's see. You have to see how Social Security was organized. There was obviously a headquarters,
Mhm.
and there were, at least then, there were 10 regional offices,
Mhm.
and they handled what you consider a region.
Mhm.
There was one in the Northwest for Oregon and Washington and Idaho and that sort of thing. But they were all, and then those the regional offices handled logistics and budgets and things like that for all the local district offices.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but beyond that, that was as far down as the management went. Below a district office, there wasn't anything. So, once most of the discussions we had, well, particularly when we started checking out what we're going to do, we invited all the regional offices to send a rep to. We had a meeting in an office,
Yeah.
to discuss. Well, what do you guys think about this? What do you think about the idea? And they all pretty much said, worth trying. And this was when it was still just in the startup process. We were trying to, feel out how things would work. But and we regional frequently went out to the regional offices too. But also every year we would go to 5 or 6 local CDI offices
Sure.
just to see how you're doing. Are you getting all cooperation from all the people you need? And how's your operation going? And you got any interesting cases? Which they usually did, although I can't recall any of them particularly.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, we talked a lot and we traveled a lot. I can't think of at least 6, 7 times a year. I was going out to a field office or a DDS office mostly to see how it's going. Is this working out the way you thought it would? Are you happy with the results? And everybody said yes. I don't know that anybody ever shut down a CDI office because it wasn't effective.
Right. Right. Well, that's the
Although I
yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
they had like I say, each of the CDI offices had a OIG officer. Special agent was in charge of the whole unit.
Yep.
And particularly when we had these annual meetings, all of those people were there.
Yeah.
And only in one case did we have one of the agents just wasn't doing a very good job, and the OIG guy that I work with, he said, yeah, she's hasn't been doing real well in the job, and they ultimately transferred her out to some other position. But
Sure.
that was the only thing I can remember where anybody got canned, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think everybody that was involved recognized that this was an important thing. We're not going to send any guys that are just goof-offs to get rid of them.
Right.
We want your best people to be working on this, and that's the way it turned out.
When it comes to, and I mean, this is the amazing thing for me because, when I look at fraud, right, and I look at what they had to prove to meet the legal standard, yeah, it's a high standard. And the main thing is, fraud. It's obviously not just an administrative punishment or a civil punishment. It's usually a criminal punishment. And
Right.
so, I was always amazed that even with those heightened legal standards, they were able to pay for their entire team. um, do you attribute that to they just didn't get the program set up right to begin with to allow for a lot of fraud? Or do you attribute it to people were just really innovative in finding ways to basically snooker money out of the SSA?
Oh, well, and I certainly have no reason to think this, but I think probably there was a lot of technological change, and
Mm,
people. Not everybody had most people didn't have a computer until sometime in the 1980s or 90s.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so probably the degree of fraud changed because people got more sophisticated, and there was probably more organized crime sort of thing where people were, particularly with childhood disability, there were people taking their kid. Oh, this is Joe, and he's 12 years old or whatever, and then
mhm,
they would go to another office and say, oh, this guy is Fred, and
right,
he's got this disability, and so they were claiming whole families worth of people that were collecting benefits that shouldn't have been.
right, right,
But in terms of I don't. There was never anything like a mafia or anything involved. It was not.
right,
Nobody ever got hurt or killed or anything like that because
right.
it was just basically just paperwork that was causing the fraud.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so I have one final question for you, and basically, thank you so much for being able to give some clarity on this because I with the historical stuff going back to in this case the '90s mostly with the formation of it. You tend to see published documents on behalf of the government. If it's not super math related, they tend to be more directing some sunlight, some positivity towards a politician or an OIG, inspector general or a commissioner, somebody. It was written for somebody to read, so it's getting that kind of spin to it. So this is amazing that we're getting kind of like the reality here. So my final question is, when it comes to basically the CDI units and how things were started back in the day. um, when it comes to the position you had, when it comes to the things that you were going through and approving, do you see anything that could have been done better earlier that would have had a positive outcome down the timeline of where the program is now?
Hmm. Well,